Merci, Monsieur le Président. I move that in the opinion of this House, to recognize the important contribution of women to Ontario's history and to acknowledge the need for greater representation of women in politics, two statues honoring Ray Lecoq and Agnes MacPhail, the first two women elected to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, should be erected on the grounds of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario.
Madame Lalonde has moved private member's notice of motion number 64. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for her presentation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, before I start my speech, I just quickly want to acknowledge the presence of several guests, and I will just point in our gallery here, and I want to say thank you to all the women and our children who are here to support my motion. It means a lot to me, and I'm very humble, but I need to recognize two individuals, one in particular, Dr. Jean Augustine, who introduced a similar motion, actually, to honor the famous five on Parliament Hill, and Lloyd Lecoq, who is the grandson of one of the two MPP I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. So welcome to our legislator, and everyone else, welcome and thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président. As I said, it's an honor to stand here today to talk about this motion that would honor two very important legislatures in Ontario's cities. The road to equality for women has not been easy nor short, and most importantly, it is far from over. And my motion is just one piece of the broader road to equality. This month is Women's History Month, and there could not be a more appropriate month to highlight the lives of two incredible women who broke the glass ceiling and were tireless crusaders for women's equality. The motion I brought forth today seeks to recognize the significant contribution of our first two female MPPs, Ray Lecoq and Agnes MacPhail. There are many of you in this House that know about Agnes MacPhail, and she, after all, was our first female MP elected. In comparison to her counterpart, Lecoq has largely omitted from the Ontario history. So I would like to start by sharing a little bit of her story. Ray Lecoq and Agnes MacPhail were both elected in Ontario's general election in 1943. Both of which represented the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation and held Toronto ridings. Lecoq represented Brecondale, while MacPhail represented East York. Lecoq served one term as MPP from 1943 to 1945. During her time in this chamber, she was a champion for women, advocating that women should be able to stay in the working world when the men came home from the war. And she was also a strong environmentalist, trailblazer, through inquiries into the effect of actually air pollution, Mr. Speaker. In 1945, she was unfortunately unable to achieve re-election, and this was largely due to Cold War anxiety, which saw her being accused of communist affiliation and ultimately led to her defeat. Lecoq rose for this fall stronger and more determined to further the cause of women. She was the head of the Housewives and Consumer Association and a prominent member of the organization far beyond her term. In 1948, she led a March of a Million Names on Parliament Hill, in which she led the fight for reasonable prices for consumer goods. Much like the name says, Ray had gathered a petition of 1 million names and presented it directly to Prime Minister Mackenzie King. The march succeeded, and the federal government did take some action against milling and baking companies who artificially fixed the price of bread. In the early 1950s, the Housewives and Consumers Association joined with other women's groups to become the Canadian Women Congress, and Ray Lecoq was elected its first president. The Congress was involved in the global peace movement in the 1950s and invited a cultural exchange between people of the Soviet Union and Canada. Ray traveled the world to attend the World Peace Council, including one hosted in China in 1956. Due to her travel to the People's Republic of China in the 50s, she was actually barred entry to America. But being a tireless crusader, she argued for this ban to be lifted, and actually it was. Unfortunately, Ray's fighting spirit was reduced when she was diagnosed with Parkinson. And she spent the last decade of her life in a hospital, passing away in 1971. But I'm glad to help start the conversation to restore Ray's legacy. And it's an even more special day because we have her grandson, as I mentioned to you here, Mr. Speaker. And again, thank you to Lloyd to represent the Lockout clan. So thank you very much. Agnes McPhail had the honor of being the first MPP in Ontario. She was also our first MP in Canada who represented Grey Bruce. She also served as a second term as an MPP, beginning in 1948 to 1951. The capstone of her political career said to be in 1951, Equal Pay Bill she introduced, a first in Ontario, a significant milestone on our journey of women's rights. Much has been done to honor this distinguished female political figure, including the establishment of March 24th as Agnes McPhail Day in a former East York. And I have to say, it's actually her birthday today, Mr. Speaker. So today, I wish Agnes happy birthday from all of us here in this legislature. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that I'm able to highlight the extensive careers of these two women and the enormous contribution they have made. I want to spend some time in my speech to talk about these two women because all too often in our history, and we were having this conversation, they're not there. They do not exist almost. Or, as we mentioned earlier, in a children's library section here in Ontario. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that this will hopefully change that concept of the history of our two first female MPP. I thought it was also important that we discuss Ray. And as I mentioned before, Agnes is well known. And in fact, she is well known enough that there is a bust of her on the grand staircase. Yet Ray's legacy has been overshadowed, and it was time to restore a place in Ontario's history. Mr. Speaker, we should also recognize that Ontario does have some milestones to be proud of. One unique story to this province is the story of the first woman to seek a seat at Queen's Park, and possibly the first woman in the British Empire to seek a seat at a provincial or federal level. Margaret Hale became the Socialist candidate for the riding of Toronto North in 1902. Her nomination to be Socialist Party candidate was accepted, despite the fact that women actually did not have the right to vote and even take a seat at Queen's Park at the time. She managed to take 1% of the vote. She was the forerunner of the suffragette movement in this province and another female trailblazer we should remember in this province. In 1943, of course, we were elected our first female MPP, both Ray Lecoq and Agnes McPhail. The first female PC elected in this House was Margaret Birch, elected in 1971, and she also became the first female cabinet minister in 1972. The first Liberal member elected was Margaret Campbell, elected in 1973. And over the decades, this chamber has slowly become more representative. After the 2014 election, there were 38 female MPPs in this chamber, which represented a record-breaking 35.5% in this House, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, 2014, our year. That marks a significant change from just 15 years prior in the 1999 election, where females were only 17% of this legislature. We've also seen the first Francophone woman elected here, Claudette Boyer, and the first Francophone female Attorney General, the Honourable Madeleine Meilleur. Our Premier, Kathleen Wynne, currently one of 3 female premiers in this country, became the first woman Premier in 2013, alongside a Deputy Premier. The leader of a third party is also a woman, and more than half of the NDP caucus are female. But all this being said, we still must pursue the journey to equality and realize that many minority women in this province, the journey is even farther. While today we are recognizing the first 2 female MPP elected to this chamber, we should also reflect upon the fact that Aboriginal women did not get the right to vote until 1960. These women were long disenfranchised, and even when they received the right to vote, the Prime Minister at the time, Dyfron Baker, did not properly conduct nation-to-nation consultation. We must be at the forefront of encouraging women to enter politics. This House is still not close to a gender level that reflects the population we represent. Therefore, we must continue working towards the goal of equal gender representation. Mr. Speaker, these statues not only represent the hard work and dedication of two political figures, but the long path ahead for women. It is not enough for public discourse to become familiarized with the contribution of women like Ray Lecoq and Agnes McPhail. Rather, it is essential that we have physical and visible displication of legislative on the legislative ground, not only just the sole purpose of sightseeing, Mr. Speaker, but for the cementing of the idea that women's contribution and hard work are just as worthy of the men. These statues are an embodiment of what worthiness appreciation and, most importantly, recognition. Members, you can see that these two statues are not just mere embodiment of the work of these two. These statues are a symbol for the road of equality for women and their equal representation in politics and all walks of life. I stand here today in honor of the women who remain steadfast in the fight for justice, equality, and representation. These are the women that have paved the way for me and other our colleagues here in this House, to courageously pursue a political path. It is because of their dedication to furthering the cause of equality for women that I'm able to stand here today. The roads to equality and representation for women is long, but what makes any journey worthwhile are the little achievements along the way in which further that cause. The power of change lies in the little step taken at the right time and the right place. It is great to see that many here understand that it is undeniably just that, a necessary step in the direction of full and equal representation for women. Agnes McPhail said, and I'll end by saying, "I want for myself what I want for other women, absolute equality." In light of those words, I hope that everyone here will support this bill. In doing so, we are making the dream of those women a reality. With this, we are one step closer to an equal and equitable Ontario. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
2 minutes to reply.
I'm going to try to wrap this up as quickly as my 2 minutes allowed. So, I want to say thank you very much to all my colleagues in this House, the member from Huron-Bruce, member of Welland, Beaches East York, Parkdale High Park, Davenport, the Associate Minister of Finance, and the member from Thornhill, to have raised and brought forward those very important aspects of why, and thank you in advance a little bit, but of most likely unanimous consent. So I'm very happy that, Jean, it may be a little bit less difficult than it was for you, but it was still an important chapter that hopefully will be passing later on. I also want to say thank you very much for several organizations who are here today, and all the women and children who are joining me for this important motion. And I know there was a lot of quotation and people sent lots of their perspective and their supports. And I want to make sure we're recognizing you today. So Nancy, from co-chair from Equal Voice Toronto, Carolyn Robertson, the chair from Famous Five Foundation, Mary Potter, who's here today, President of the Provincial Council of Women of Ontario, Lois Vokes, President, Canadian Association of Women Executive and Entrepreneur, and in my hometown of Ottawa, I used to be a social worker, and a good colleague, former colleague of mine, through the Association of Social Work, sent me a very nice note. So I wouldn't be myself if I was not able to say and recognize Mr. Speaker. And last but not least, our Business and Professional Women's Club of Ontario, who has shown support. This is the beginning, I hope, of what will be an education for all Ontarians about the role of women in politics. The two first MPP elected in this legislature, in my opinion, should be having a bigger presence and also having a chance to be reflecting upon as groups and students would come forward. So merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.